The Snowtown Murders, Australia's Bodies in Barrels case. The Snowtown Murders, also known as the Bodies in Barrels case, is one of Australia's most gruesome and disturbing series of crimes. Between 1992 and 1999, a group of men led by John Bunting tortured and killed at least 12 people, mostly in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, South Australia. The murders were motivated by Bunting's twisted hatred of pedophiles, homosexuals, and people he perceived as weak or deviant. The bodies of 8 of the victims were found in barrels of acid in an abandoned bank vault in the small town of Snowtown, giving the case its chilling name. The Snowtown Murders shocked Australia with the sheer brutality of the killings and the warped motivations of the killers, leaving a permanent scar on the nation's criminal history. The leader, John Bunting, the ringleader of the group, was a man filled with hatred and fueled by a belief that he was purging society of people he saw as morally corrupt or inferior. Born in 1966, Bunting had a troubled upbringing and developed a deep-seated hatred of pedophiles and homosexuals after being sexually abused as a child. His hatred eventually evolved into a violent obsession, and he began targeting people he believed fit these categories, even when there was no evidence to support his accusations. Bunting was a charismatic and manipulative figure who drew others into his sadistic world. He convinced several men, including Robert Wagner and James Vlasakis, to help him in his killing spree, framing the murders as a form of justice. Bunting's victims were often people he knew personally, including friends, neighbors, and even acquaintances of his accomplices. Bunting's victims were vulnerable individuals, often chosen because they were easy targets or because Bunting falsely believed they were pedophiles or homosexuals. The group's victims included the mentally ill, drug addicts, and even some of their own acquaintances. Many of the victims were tortured before being killed, and Bunting and his accomplices showed no mercy in their acts of brutality. Some of the victims were lured to Bunting's home or other locations under false pretenses, only to be subjected to horrific torture. The killers used a variety of methods to inflict pain, including beatings, strangulation, and electrocution. In some cases, they forced their victims to record messages or make false statements before killing them, which were later used to mislead family members into thinking the victims were still alive. After killing their victims, Bunting and his group dismembered the bodies and placed them in barrels filled with acid to dissolve the remains. These barrels were eventually stored in an abandoned bank vault in Snowtown, a small, rural town about 90 miles north of Adelaide. The killers believed the remote location would prevent the bodies from being discovered. The gruesome discovery: the group might have continued their killing spree undetected if not for a police investigation that eventually led authorities to the Snowtown bank vault. In May 1999, after receiving tips about missing persons and suspicious activities, the police searched the vault and made a horrifying discovery: barrels containing the remains of 8 dismembered bodies. The police quickly linked the barrels to John Bunting and his accomplices, and over time, they uncovered the full extent of the group's crimes. It was revealed that Bunting had kept meticulous records of his killings, including details about each victim, the method of torture, and even financial gains from stealing the victims' Social Security payments. The trial and sentencing: the Snowtown Murders case became one of the longest and most complex criminal trials in Australian history. John Bunting, Robert Wagner, and James Vlasakis were all arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and the gruesome details of their crimes shocked the public. John Bunting and Robert Wagner were convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Wagner remained fiercely loyal to Bunting throughout the trial and showed no remorse for his actions. James Vlasakis, who had been drawn into the group as a teenager and participated in several of the murders, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Another accomplice, Mark Hayden, was convicted of helping dispose of the bodies and was also sentenced to life in prison. The trial revealed the horrifying details of the torture and killings, and the Snowtown murders became a symbol of the darkest depths of human cruelty. The public was particularly disturbed by the fact that the murders had been motivated by Bunting's warped sense of morality and justice, and that he had managed to manipulate others into participating in his sadistic acts. The aftermath of the Snowtown murders left a lasting impact on the small town of Snowtown, which became infamous as the location of the grisly discovery. The town, once a quiet and remote farming community, was forever tainted by the crimes, and many residents have since struggled with the association. The case has been the subject of documentaries, books, and even a feature film, but it remains a deeply disturbing chapter in Australia's criminal history. The families of the victims were left devastated by the loss of their loved ones, many of whom had endured unimaginable suffering before their deaths. The case also raised questions about how such extreme violence and cruelty could have gone unnoticed for so long, and how individuals like John Bunting could convince others to join them in their horrific acts. A legacy of horror, the Snowtown murders stand as one of the most brutal and grotesque killing sprees in Australian history. The sheer cruelty of the torture, the methodical disposal of the bodies in barrels of acid, and the twisted motivations behind the killings shocked the nation and left an indelible mark on Australia's criminal landscape. For many, the Snowtown murders are a chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist in human nature and the terrifying consequences when that darkness is allowed to flourish unchecked.